Well, I'll start by saying that this acacia tree is super special to me and my family because both my kiddos grew up under this tree. Um, yeah, the forest school we started when my eldest was about 3 was kind of birthed under this tree. And so we've seen it through so many years of seasons and life and, yeah, kids growing up. And so it's really special to gather together under here. I'm so glad to share it with you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I live about 5 minutes away. So this is like a place I come when I need to get some perspective and like climb up the rocks, the boulders in Glen Canyon. And yeah, it's good to be here with you.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah. Yeah, it feels like we've already carved a little pocket of space and time. We were just talking about how our relationship to time means so much for how free we feel.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's because we really literally don't have our own control over our own time. We don't have the ability to carve out a little block of time in the day to just sit under a tree.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's also just being so used to not making time too, like being connected to so many different things that we forget we need some time and space to just be.
Yeah, I think that there's so much happening when it comes to thinking about our relationship to time living in capitalism. Like, capitalism breaks down our time into productive chunks, right? And so sitting under a tree is kind of radical because you're not doing anything, you're just existing. And I think that's really countercultural to capitalism. And there's like a few people who control a lot of our time. And so who gets to have freedom in their time? Who gets to create freedom in their time? Who gets to even like come up for air and think about time? Yeah, when you're inundated, you don't have even time to ask those questions about like who gets to control your time and what can we do to subvert and challenge that?
Yeah, right.
And I think about that a lot from like the construct of being a mother specifically, like in this construct, in like the nuclear family structure, who decides how I spend my time? And how do I reclaim pieces of my time, parts of my time for my own creative practice?
Right.
In a way that doesn't disconnect me from my kids or from my community or from society.
Right.
You know,
where you're still connected to all of the, ways that you're responsible and connected to other people and community.
Yeah.
But these aren't like two extremes where you have to swing from being irresponsible and disconnected
100%.
to have that time. And I do feel that feels like the bargain that you create. It's like, oh, we can't be in community and have time for ourselves and to reconnect to something maybe more inward.
Yeah.
But actually, I found for me, having come from a lot of community work and having so many responsibilities to community, that it wasn't sustainable to do that even. So it wasn't even responsible to community to not carve out that time.
Right. And I think like a lot of times when you're doing justice work or community-oriented work, there's this sense of urgency, which comes from white supremacy and capitalism, that seeps into those community and organizing and justice spaces. That's really pretty harmful, I think. That we are allowed to go slow and we are allowed to rest and we're allowed to take some time. And that rest can happen in relationship. Like it doesn't have to be so disconnecting. And so does creativity. Like both of those things can still happen in relationship.
Right.
And so what does that look like? Like, what does it look like to be in rest in relationship? What does it look like to not feel like you're in a zero-sum game between rest and connection?
I think that's such a beautiful question.
Yeah.
And that does feel like, especially in a time when there's so much need to like mobilize for community or provide for each other, like how are there also ways to provide rest with each other or provide nourishment in ways that aren't, where it's not like a I give and you receive, but there's some way that it's nourishing everyone. And I feel that's why I wanted to do this here, under trees and in a space that's inherently nourishing, because I know it will be nourishing for us just to be here. And it will be nourishing for whoever's watching as well. Even if we don't say anything that's very interesting.
Just like the existence.
Just literally, because for someone who's watching and you're on a bus on your way to work. Just by watching nature is nourishing. And just to be, watching people who are connecting is nourishing. And so there's ways in which that's a pretty simple act. But I know if I've taken the bus in Oakland so many times, or as an hour-long bus ride, because all the people that are coming on and off, and it was only from North Oakland to downtown or whatever it is. That amount of time could deplete you or it could nourish you, depending on what we provide each other in those moments.
100%. What does it actually look like to witness relationship? We right now are having a conversation where it's if I see you and you see me, at the end of this we're going to be different. We're going to be shaped differently together. We're creating a circle together where we get to shape each other, right? And that has ripples into our day and ripples into the people that we interact with today. And I think we're also shaped by and shaping the environment together.
Yeah, and that's kind of also the whole question to me too, about what does it look like to nourish each other. To me also feels or at least has felt in my life, weaving myself back into the ecosystem. And because when we're separated from nature in our minds and in our hearts and our bodies, literally in most cities that are really populated don't have parks or nature that is enough of a respite. Might be a little bit, but not enough to really feel you're in a space that is carved out, that bit of time that's carved out, that space that's carved out, that isn't productive. I think maybe that's what it really is, right? So it's because sidewalks feel like they need to be productive.
You have to go somewhere.
Buildings, you feel like you need to be productive. Stores, something needs to be bought. So where's a space where the purpose isn't to be productive? But to rest and to relax or even play. And that, obviously that's by historical design. So to be intentional about trying to create that where we are or in new places feels really exciting to me in a time when we really need energy to replenish with everything that keeps piling on in the collective, right?
I think we were just talking about this, right? That watching LA right now and watching mobilization happen, and then trying to figure out what sustaining ourselves looks like in a time that's escalating pretty quickly. Is a huge question. And I think it brings us to that question of how do we resource each other? How do we find these pockets that are by design disappearing in our time and in our spaces? It's not an accident that our time is so fragmented, and it's also not an accident that our environments are disappearing in which we can come together in those ways. So if we're thinking about time together, if we're thinking about space together, how do we build those practices in community that can sustain us through this moment? Because we can protest and come together and disappear, but in between the protests and the marching, we have to be organizing. We have to be able to take care of each other. We have to know, when someone's super down, and we have to know how to bring them food or bring them comfort or just sit with them and connect and change the way that they're feeling in that moment, just by not by trying to change the feeling or make it disappear, but just by coexisting in space together,
Right.
I think that's what's the question I'm asking is, we're so siloed. We're so siloed in our nuclear families. Like, we all have our own little homes and our own little fridges, and we're making our own little food, and we're like running to and from our jobs, and it's by design separate.
Right.
You know?
And that because we don't have collective ways of, really, it's like creating more efficiency in our day.
Yeah.
Like by having kitchens that we share, or ways that we cook together, literally just not having to pay for as much space because we have ways that we have communal spaces. It puts you in even more of that, like needing to be on this like treadmill of never having enough.
Yeah.
And so there's something almost just about like the consciousness of like realizing that and saying, what is it that we could create communally that nourishes? I even wonder, just as the LA protests are happening, and wondering, when it comes up here, what are ways in which we could protest restfully? I don't know, but I wonder if it, like, there's ways to literally put bodies on the line where we're not losing energy. Also, like, to sit in a way that could, or be together, or in a way that's not.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, because my daughter and I were just out to lunch in the Haight yesterday, and we were talking about protests and movements, and how you actually can't just live in the grief and rage forever. Like, that's not sustainable, and that you have to actually be working towards joy. Like, what does it look like to find joy in a protest? What does it look like to attend a Palestinian fundraiser and like learn to do the depka and dance? Like, dance is a form of resilience and as a form of like reclamation, right? What are the ways that you can marry your resistance work with joy
and dignity? This is a word that I've come back to, and I've thought about, just having worked in a lot of social justice spaces, where that word I realized was only really used for what we consider like the most, I guess, pushed out to the edges of society, those who are unhoused, those who are in prison, like people who we see they need to reclaim their dignity because of their condition or whatever. That's the kind of language that's used, at least in a lot of work. And I was thinking, actually, like, dignity, it literally means, it's like knowing and holding your worth, like the etymology of it, the root meaning of it. And there's a certain way of holding oneself that, I am worth living a full life of joy regardless of what happens. And knowing that, of course, like, if you're in like the immediate like line of fire or in danger, that's a really difficult thing to do, but how powerful that is, and how much more powerful that could be, just as its own statement or own protest in itself. To reaffirm like our own humanity at a time where there's so much dehumanization across the world, across Palestine to LA, like, to think about where then someone is dehumanizing and degrading what it means to be human. How can we instead sit or play or be in a way that really reaffirms and even like tries to further like a greater sense of humanity, right?
And I think this is actually what's so powerful, is I think that there's this moment of rejecting the dominant narrative and like reclaiming our own narrative about our own dignity and about our own identities and about our own joy. I think so much of this administration is trying to reify white colonial power. Like, that's really what's happening. It's like white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. And they're really just trying to get back to like the founding fathers. Like Anna Malika Tubbs talks about that in her book Erase. Like, that's really what, it's really obvious when you look at it from the lens of patriarchy. They're just trying to get us back to like patriarchy 101. You know, and if you think about it like that, every action they do is super obvious. So, but I think what's hard right now is that they don't own the narrative. Like, they are owning some people's version of the narrative, but there's our collective decolonizing narrative that's getting louder. And that's really powerful. And like, that's us saying, we reject your narrative, actually.
Right.
Like, we get to have our dignity.
Right.
We get to exist.
Have a full humanity.
Yeah, we get to exist in our joy, and we get to exist in our power.
And our unproductiveness, too.
Yeah,
like,
our rest.
Yeah, like you're saying, it is in a society that's based on productivity and using people's bodies in a way that's not humanizing. It's very radical to not be productive in those same ways. Like and that's why it's so dangerous for people. Like Ross Gay talks about like loitering, right, as being a really radical act. And I think about that often because what is so dangerous about loitering or anyone who's playing in public spaces in ways that doesn't feel like it fits some kind of norm of society? It's threatening to just the idea of where everyone should be, how our bodies should be moving, how fast they should be moving, and like how much we should be consuming.
That piece.
Right. And to just wander, even like without a particular aim, can be a dangerous, especially depending on what color your skin is. It's a very like dangerous position to be in, and at a time when taking up space maybe in the streets like is just becoming more and more necessary. What does it look like to do that in a way that's not in a reaction, but maybe just a more of a moving with that whole sense of no one can take this freedom that's within us. That like we already, like by the definition of dignity too, is it's something that can't be taken. And I think about my time just working in a lot of, social justice spaces and thinking about, I don't think that orientation necessarily was that we were working with a sense of like, we already have what we need. In that, like, because there's like literal material things that we're trying to change in our communities, but at the core and like essence, like there's something that no one can take. Which is dignity. Or a sense of our humanity. And no matter how much someone dehumanizes from the outside, that actually the humanity is not up for debate.
And we get to affirm each other's humanity and dignity the more we build aligned community together. So like the more we have these relationships one-on-one, in a circle, in our communities, like the easier it becomes to have that be the narrative we're living and breathing, because the dominant narrative is not going to affirm our dignity and humanity. That's just true. And so we have to build countercultural communities that actively do that for one another every day. And we can do that inner work, but it really happens in relationship. Like, I can't keep that steady sense of my dignity and humanity without mirroring and reflecting from other people.
Because we're not separate in the end. And we were just talking about earlier that in like my little community that there's one person in town who was always that touch point for like any point where I was losing that center in my day, I knew I could go and see. Yeah. And how, in a sense, how fragile we are to the swings of life and things that happen. And also acknowledging that too. It's like that's part of why we need each other so much, is because there's the waves of things that happen in our communities, like just right now, with everyone who's trying to mobilize to support so many families who are losing everything. When those days come, like, where can we lean or come closer, gather closer together?
And where are the spaces that allow for that, right? Like, where are the spaces that allow for us to gather? I've been going to more shows and fundraisers and gatherings for Palestine that are predominantly Black and brown people, BIPOC folks, and it just, every time I walk in, my heart just like loosens. Just my chest, like the knot that I don't even know I'm carrying, just loosens. And it's really it's so profound what a space filled with like-hearted community can do for just our bodies. Like what we can do for each other, just existing together in those kinds of spaces. And so I'm often wondering, like, where are we gathering? Where can we gather? Where are the spaces that allow for that kind of gathering?
Right.
Like the open spaces like this, and then also the art spaces. I think it's really important, the art and community centers and culture centers that allow for that kind of coming together.
Right. And maybe allow for it and like generate that kind of coming together. Because like why isn't it that we aren't meeting that way? And part it does feel like, because we're already set up in such separate lives. But so like what is it that we gather around? Like food, like basic daily things, the things that dance, like music, you're saying like different events.
And it's easy to start things like that. Like we don't always have to look outside of ourselves to make those kinds of gatherings happen, and they can be really small. So when my youngest, when we came back, we were away for a year for COVID, and we came back to San Francisco, and I just started up a weekly playgroup for countercultural families. And we would just meet in the botanical gardens or some outdoor nature area once a week. It was the same time each week. And we had a really conscious, like, countercultural agreement about how we wanted to be with each other and our kids, and how we wanted to practice nonviolence and restorative justice. And but it was pretty simple, like, and it was just like someone had to initiate creating a regular container and finding people, and enough people had to say, I want this in my life. And I think so many of us are living in isolation that if you create like a weekly or monthly or quarterly container, people will come. Right. And it doesn't take like owning a cultural center necessarily. You can just do it in the forest. You can do it in the gardens.
And even, not having that much structure. I think that's another thing that I know can feel like starting something, you need to have a lot of structure or be offering something particular. But actually, I feel these days, it's almost the opposite. Like often when we do meet in groups, it's overly structured in a way that doesn't allow for this spaciousness of just being together and connecting in an authentic way that feels that is nourishing. Because if you're trying to do something together that's not something you really want to do, which we've all been in those spaces, right? Like where it's overly structured, that doesn't allow for the natural movements of bodies and hearts and minds to create something that's more natural. Then of course we don't want to join those groups, or we don't want to like show up again. But just like creating something that's more structured in, like you're saying, like maybe the common agreements of how we treat each other. That
we're here together to connect with our kids, to connect with ourselves, to connect with the trees, right?
Yeah.
We're here, we're not trying to produce anything except like feed our relationships to those 3 parts of ourselves, really. And that we get to create containers together to do that. And that's what sustains the politicized work. Because I think there's a danger in saying like, oh, we need to learn to rest if you're not already rooted in a politicized praxis. And we were talking about this earlier, right? Like, you can definitely chase joy and not be politicized.
Right.
And that's a political act, but it's one that reifies a construct that's harmful to lots of folks.
Yeah,
right?
And this is where I find, like, there's kind of a middle way, as they say in Buddhism, right? Where you can kind of check, like, if I'm leaning into joy, but it doesn't connect into community or some way that I'm weaving something together where it's feeding the collective. Like, we can, it's going to ebb and flow, right? There's not always going to be a perfect balance, but it can be a way to sort of just check in and be like, okay, and or just even tie together, like, if this individual joy can help somehow in, like, by creating a space for other people or creating a project that helps
or just that it feeds you enough to help you with your bigger politicized work or whatever, right? But that you yourself are rooted in a praxis of liberation, I think is really important, right? Like, how do we sustain our commitment to the work, to the collective liberation work, and rest in that container, like find joy in that container.
Right. And there might be seasons where you're more in the external, and that's the work, and you're not resting as much. And then there might be seasons where, like, winter comes, the trees' leaves fall, and you're just resting for a few months. Like, and then you go back out into the world and you carry that. And so there's different ways that can look. Balance looks different for different bodies.
100%.
But it is, kind of just not ignoring what we know to be true, I think, really. It's like just knowing that if you are kind of creating joy just for your own pleasure, and it doesn't in the end connect to the greater community, we all kind of know there's something inside that we'll know naturally, like, that doesn't feel quite right, that there's something that needs to feed into something greater. I think often, like, a lot of folks in especially the US feel like there's a lack of purpose because of our disconnectedness. And that there's, like, a natural sense of purpose and flow when you are connected in community. So it's in that way, sometimes just listening to our own natural kind of calling inside of where our energy wants to go.
And I think that there's like a felt sense, like an energetic sense to the way the joy feels when it's rooted in something outside of just yourself. Because I think that there's like a hollow joy or like an artificial like happiness that comes from like capitalism wanting you to buy and consume and create and produce, and there's these like dopamine hits that come, right? But that has a very different tenor to it energetically than like a rooted embodied joy that's about connection.
I love that. And I think sometimes for me that feels like, does the joy leave any kind of after feeling? When is it a joy that kind of leaves you feeling for the rest of your day? Like that's nourishing and carrying with you? Or is it just for that hour? Or is it, it's like a shorter term sense of like maybe getting pleasure or dopamine hit from something, but it doesn't sustain and carry you. Even like, I think a great conversation to me is one of my like best ways of actually feeling that joy and connection and community. And when you have a great conversation, you'll carry that for weeks after. And it's like a wellspring you can come back to, because there are moments that you can tap into. You're like, that moment felt like something that generated something in me. And even like in podcasts and stuff, I listen to podcasts like over and over again that have that quality to them. And there, it is a joy, but it's coming from a deeper place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's that deeper place is reminding us that we're connected. Like, that doesn't happen if you're buying something on Amazon, right? Or it doesn't happen if you're looking on Instagram and like tracking how many likes you're getting. Like, that's not actual connecting. But sitting in conversation with someone, you're like, oh yeah, we're like two beings on this planet that are inextricably interwoven with this tree and with each other, right?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't leave you because it's just a reminder of something we all, I think, really deeply know. We just need to be reminded of.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually was, when I was creating this idea of sitting under a tree facing each other, I actually did have a moment just reflecting on, normally, you'd go on Zoom or something with like conversations with people you're not living in the same town, and you would see each other through a screen, and there's something, you can still have connection that way, but I was realizing just by sitting here and us face to face, in some sense feels kind of radical. It also feels like it's a little bit out of the way, like, I had to schedule, we had to find space and time to do this, and that in just doing that, there's something that's different about how we're connecting. And not to say that everyone can do that, because I know so many folks just don't literally have the time. But if someone's watching this, like you're saying, and then gets to see like two people facing each other, it's such a different thing than most of our media these days. And I think it's just interesting to me that these little details about how we choose to orient. Like, even if calling a friend, you could like call and FaceTime or Zoom or whatever, or just go to meet each other in person. Just noticing in our bodies how different that feels. And making the efforts that feel like they're gonna actually feed that sense of connection in the body. Beyond the sense of like ticking off the box, like, I'm going to see a friend this week or connect with them in some way. Like, how can we connect in ways that actually feel more, like they hit that place of, you're like, oh, this makes life a little better today. I can get through this next week. Because of this.
And it reminds me of what you were saying a little earlier about the difference between being in a small town versus a big city, how you get to see familiar faces every day, and that you get to feel like someone will bring you joy in that day, in one of those interactions, right? And in a big city, it's like, it can be really hard if you're not embedded and enmeshed in your community, if you're a transplant to that community, if you're working 2 or 3 jobs. Like, it can be really hard to see just those familiar faces, like to know your neighbors, to know your local mail person. Like, it can be hard to make relationships with the people that you just live by, because everybody's so busy. So sometimes I think about living in a big city, like, how can we orchestrate those kinds of connections that you get in a small town? Like, how can we create microcosms of community that give us that same feeling of intimacy and connection and being known? I think everyone at the end of the day is just trying to be seen. Like, do you see me? Are you going to keep me safe? Are you going to show up for me? And I think everyone's just wanting resounding yeses. Like, I see you. Like, I know you. You are known. You are loved. You are safe. I'm going to keep you safe. We're going to keep each other safe. And at a fundamental level, how do we make sure we have people in our lives outside of our nuclear families that see and know us in that way on the daily, right? Even if they're not our best friends, like, can I see and know my neighbor, right? Can I see and know the person at my local coffee shop? Can I see and know the person that brings me my mail, right? Those are questions I'm trying to figure out. Like, and capitalism makes it really easy to just do everything efficiently on your phone, so that you don't actually need to build any relationships with anybody. And that's to our huge detriment, I think. You know?
Or even, I know the difference of going to a coffee shop in a big city and trying to talk to the barista. It may not be someone who's super available to talk because they feel so busy. And so, but it's like all these little moments where it really is about finding some way to consistently connect to the same people. That brings that sense of being seen. And I've noticed that, living in a small town now, that, growing up in a big city, that the difference of just witnessing and bearing witness to each other's lives that I never knew was something I could have. But how important literally just seeing each other is literally just visually seeing each other. It actually I didn't realize that so much of that longing in me for that on a daily basis could be satiated by literally just passing someone who you know that knows you on a daily basis. And that's actually like, because that core sense of us all needing that, sometimes it feels like, oh, this is such a deep well that I need to fill up, through deep connections every day. And yes, that's also true, but there's also so much of that can just be met through literally just like that sense of safety of a community is around you, witnessing your life. And that, like, people that I've known who were pregnant and then, they're about to have the baby and then have the baby and then seeing the baby, but not even really being that close to that person, but witnessing their progression of their life through being in common communal spaces in the town. And feeling how primal that registers in the body as, oh, this makes for a safer community. Because I know that like 50 people would come to my aid if I needed anything, just because we're in proximity to each other and witness to each other's lives,
I mean, I think that's how we're supposed to live. Like, that feels so profound that we don't live that way. And that we've created a construct in which most people in big cities don't live that way. And I've actually thought about how, like, the way, like, class mobility creates more separateness. So, like, the more wealth you accumulate, the more you outsource so much of the labor, the more you become separate from the community, from leaning on the communities that surround you, or being leaned on by the communities that surround you. So I think there's this active having to subvert that tendency towards separateness with class mobility. Because so many people are unhappy and lonely and yet are, like, outsourcing work that they could be leaning on each other for, right?
Or even, just relating to the people who work for them as equals, as human beings, and being in relationship to people. And that's where, like, the objectification of so much labor in our daily lives actually is a big part of this. I do feel growing up in a city, that is kind of how we're taught to relate, without trying. Like, I know that I was raised by kind people, in my community generally, but it's pretty normal to go to the grocery store and not really talk to the person at the grocery store, really, and, like, relate to them in a way that truly gives that sense of real connection and real care. And same with, going to a restaurant or going to a coffee shop or even, like a toll. Well, we used to have toll people, but like things that are, like, very transactional jobs in terms of, like, it's a quick passage of money. That those are also opportunities for humanizing each other by just taking a little bit more effort to make that connection. But often too, we may not be met. with openness.
And I think person willing to have a relational experience with you in that moment,
or are they just like done with their day? Sometimes, I mean, if you have the capacity, it's worth taking that risk, because it could, like we were saying, like then ripple out to a whole lot of other interactions, maybe for the rest of the day. Then that barista at the coffee shop then treats everyone else that way. It's like building culture, but in conditions that are really hard to build that kind of culture.
It's almost like breaking the script. Like we're like robots in a script or something, and we're trying to, how do we subvert the script we've been handed around transactional relationships and around our disconnection. You might try to like break through to someone and they're like still in the script, or they're just not able to do that with you, and that's fine. But like, what other ways can we do that? What other ways can we see, like, okay, this is the script that's been laid before me and I think it's bullshit. Like, how do I do something different? How do I actually reach people in my life? How do I reach people in this moment, but like over time? Is it like I visit the same coffee shop every Tuesday and then eventually I build that relationship, right?
I think it can be that simple, really. I mean, that is like, where are there any stores that you could even frequent without even buying anything? Like a small business, just like I was saying, one of my best friends, like from our town, is a small business owner whom, like, maybe I wasn't there to buy anything, but maybe sometimes I would to support the business. But it was more about nourishing each other through relationship and stopping in and saying hello. And there might be like businesses like in folks' communities that need just a little like moral boost. Just like you notice a business in your neighborhood doesn't have a lot of people coming through, like maybe they need someone to walk through the door just to like have that little bit of connection and noticing, oh, you're here.
Hi, right?
You're here, you're witnessed, I see you.
I know your name, right? Like I know your name when I walk in and I can say hello. And like really know you in some way, right? Do I know the name of my mail person? Do I know the name of my local barista? Do I know the name of my neighbors? Do I know like what their phone number is in case they ever need something, Can I like text them and borrow an egg, or like, I guess I wouldn't give that egg back, but like, can we lean on each other in ways that are really simple? And then you can start to think about like, what is leaning on each other in ways that are more profound to look like? Because with the play group I built for my youngest, we're all still in deep connection, and we care for each other's kids and we do carpools together. And I know I could call them if there was an emergency, but that took many years of building together, right? And I think a lot of people don't. It takes work and it takes time, and I had the luxury of having time to build it, which most people don't have that when they have kids, right? Like I had the luxury of having a pretty flexible consulting firm, and so that I could take time. But a lot of people don't have that. So how can we, do it in the smallest ways, but sustain that over time? Because the relationships are really going to deepen with time.
And sometimes just out of necessity too. But it's like even in just being more creative about what's necessary. And trying to find literally more efficient ways to do things that are necessary. Together.
Like in that chapter of life, it was really necessary to not parent alone for me, because I grew up in an Egyptian family with lots of extended family where I was raised. And when I came to being a mother, I was like, I don't even know how one does this alone. Like, how do people do that? And so it started with me finding a community that someone else had created. And then by my second, I started my own. And I think a lot of parents are in that situation where they're just parenting in a silo. And that's not how we're meant to do it. And there are many chapters in our lives, parenting or otherwise, in which there is a necessity to find each other. And you're right, like finding efficiencies kind of, and like cutting through the script or the social norms to actually get our needs met for connection and for interdependence. Because the way it's set up actually doesn't serve our connection needs. or our support needs at all.
Right. Yeah, it's almost just listening to when you feel like there is a need.
Yeah.
That, and validating that this is a real need. Like, I think just even what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because of your background being from a different place, you could say, how do we do this way? Like, that doesn't make sense. But for an American, like, who just doesn't have any other context, they might be like, well, this is just the way we do it.
Yeah.
And we don't give ourselves the permission to listen to that voice inside that says, I don't think this is supposed to be done this way. Like, I don't want to do it this way. I don't want to be alone through this. And it could be like parenting, or it could be just a certain season in life, or whatever you're trying to create. That if there's something that's like saying like this, there's got to be another way to connect, or another way to be in community.
Right.
It's probably true.
Right. And especially like back to the point of organizing, I think we're all seeing a growing need for collective, sustained organizing. And that is an opportunity to say, okay, where are my people? Like, who are the people that I can count on to text and show up to a protest with me?
Yeah.
Like, who are the people that I know I could like make rage art with because I'm feeling so disempowered, and the only way to find my voice is to make art, but I don't want to do it alone. Who are the people I could like break bread with? Who are the people I could go to a show with? Like, who are the people that I could lean on in this time that's so tumultuous? Who just know, like, see the red wall as a red wall, who are not trying to gaslight, who are not trying to diminish, who are as committed to liberation as you are, and who you can call, right? Like, who will gather with you in whatever way feels nourishing. And I think that's a practice of rest, is like, who can I rest with? Who can I find joy with? Who can I chase the sun with? Like, who can I rest under a tree with? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and know what part of that you need, really. And that is huge, actually, just even knowing what you need.
Yeah.
That in itself is a lifelong journey of just uncovering, like, how do you know what you need in a society where we're not taught really how to really know ourselves beyond what we've been told to need or want.
Yeah.
And even maybe being in a practice in community of like asking each other and pulling that out from each other. Like, what is it that we really want and need that we can give to each other?
Yeah. And learning each other's responses to what we're witnessing, right? Like, I was speaking to a dear friend yesterday who was feeling rage watching LA. I'm like, what are you needing? Like, what is helpful for you as you watch this? Is it comfort?
Right.
Is it a prayer? Is it a visualization? Do you just need quiet? Like, in what way can I show up? And that's learning someone in a new way, because we're facing really different times, right? Like, not that we haven't been seeing an escalation for a long, long time, but you know, the National Guards are being called into LA. That is a level of escalation that's new.
Yeah.
And so as we're witnessing that, we're going to need to learn each other in a different way than we might have known one another.
Right.
And we're going to have different responses based on who we are as people and like the lives we grew up with and how we've been shaped and how we were parented. Like, so that in itself is radical, right? Like, you're self-connecting, but then you're also connecting into other people around you's needs. Like, how do we get to show up for each other? What do we all need in those moments?
Yeah. And even having the space internally to ask someone. And that in itself too, like, you know, there may be folks who just don't have that space, but for people who can cultivate that, especially, you know, I've been feeling into, like, for the most able and privileged folks in these times of you know, chaos in city streets, like, who are the bodies that could potentially hold more with what capacities they're given through the conditions of their lives.
Yeah.
And how powerful actually that could be for like, I saw a video of someone calling forth like white women to be at the forefront of protests, and I was really feeling into like how powerful that could be for certain identities who have maybe more of like a sense of ability to be in front of like, you know, people, armed people, and not be as punished, you know, for their behavior.
Yes.
That's a capacity that certain bodies have that other bodies don't. And same like emotionally too, where like potentially if we do our own internal work too, as like I personally am half white, so I've been to different like white groups to do my own like emotional and internal work on that, and thinking about the spaciousness, if you carve that within yourself, how much spaciousness you can offer to emotionally to spaces where people do need to rage and to have like all the bigness of the emotions that come up,
right,
without it, you know, obviously like this is where like, not without making it about you, right? Like that can be a huge offering for people in a time when everyone's activated,
right.
Can you find the emotional depth and space within you that could be an offering for the collective in itself?
Right.
Yeah.
It reminds me, like, our chosen grandmother is named Spirulina, and she's been a part of our family since my youngest was 2, and she like radically unschooled her daughter all the way until college, and she would bring her daughter to protests, and one time the cops were getting pretty handsy, and she was pretty naive. It was like her first couple protests with her youngest daughter, and so she was like, okay, I'm gonna like remove us from this situation. And someone who was a longtime organizer whispered, stay here, you're gonna keep us safer. And Spirulina's a white woman, she has a white daughter, and it was true.
Right.
It was true. She was a white woman with a kid, and that protected a whole group of people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so she stayed. And there's something about that, like the collective responsibility to each other, that we can keep each other safe, and that some bodies are able to do that just by nature of the structures that we live in, right?
Yeah.
They're super random.
Right. Not that it's like a validation of that way of valuing bodies, but it is something to just reckon with the reality that we live in.
Right.
Knowing the power that, like, you really, recognizing the power of our bodies in spaces, and how we can, because an alternative is for someone to move through that space and make it about them, and then not be willing to bring like forward their body in a way that can help serve the collective. So, and not to say that we should all be self-sacrificial, like everyone still has to listen to their own internal sense of what's right, but it does feel like that these are the kinds of questions I guess I have around like the, reckoning with what's real, around seeing, in a time when all these families are being torn apart and people are being taken, who's coming to the streets and who's on the front lines, if they're Black or brown people again, or if there's like the Women's March type of folks like at the forefront. What if people in their little pussy hats came to the front lines of something like this? That would be very powerful, I feel. I don't know. It's an interesting question to just, like, these are just really being with what are the ways in which, like, my body and what I have available to me emotionally, physically, like, structurally, how that can be of true, like, service to people.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant question, and I think it also speaks back to the question of rest and who we're speaking to when we talk about rest and who we're speaking to when we talk about joy. Because I think that it's a very different question when you're speaking to BIPOC folks who've been in justice work and who are tired and whose bodies really desperately need rest than when you're speaking to white women. Like, not that white women don't need rest, but that what is happening structurally on the daily to their bodies is very different than a black man living in this country or a black woman living in this country, right?
Yeah.
Or someone who's like in active threat of ICE deporting their family or their loved ones or themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so the need for rest looks really different. And the need for doing your work looks really different in those two scenarios.
Yeah.
So contextual, like, yeah, I think there's a lot of like the mental health or wellness spaces that speak about rest without speaking about the politics, and they're speaking to specifically white audiences.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, actually, you should rest, yes, but also you should do your politicized work.
Well, even then, too, like sometimes it is that I've noticed this in like different healing spaces, that white bodies, it's actually not being in touch with rest too that often leads to harm.
Yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, and this is something that I more recently was trying to put words to, but I can often see there's an anxiety in more white-bodied folks where there's an unease with being present, like really connecting with each other. Yeah. And I find it so much easier to truly connect with people of color. Yeah. And that has been like across my lifetime. And it's something I haven't really I think articulated until more recently. Right. But just even being in spaces where, we're trying to be in community and resting. Yeah. That the white folks in the room are having a really hard time just sitting and listening and being with someone and hearing, right? And I think that, so in some senses, these things are intertwined. That's interesting. Yeah. Right? Their inability to hear each other is very tied to our inability to be with ourselves and another. Yeah. Because you can't really truly hear and then respond to someone unless you're actually present with them. And
unless you're having deep internal self-connection about what's happening with your own feelings and your needs. Right. And I think what we're like dancing around maybe is that takes a reckoning with your identity and your whiteness and all
what
that comes
keeps
up.
you from being embodied. Yeah. Because there's a lot of shame around whiteness. Right. And the shame can kind of kick you out of your body and into your mind. Right. And then there's a lot of like mental anxiety about all the ways that I'm a bad, blah, 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 or I'm not doing enough, or a lot of other thoughts that actually don't help. Yeah. But if you trace them back to the shame of whiteness, which, for all the harm that's done to people through whiteness to perpetuate it, it really does a lot to the body too. Yeah. Right? Yeah. That it, like, by being at the top of that hierarchy, it's a lot of shame to carry. Right. And to come back into the body and feel that shame, I do feel like, when I've seen this, it's been very fruitful for the people, then especially BIPOC people, to have someone who's white who can hold and own their shame, or like move through it in a way where there's just more presence in the body to actually be like, what do you need? Yeah. And I can actually sit with you and you can be in your rage, and it doesn't threaten my identity or doesn't threaten my emotional body because my shame isn't getting kicked up. Right, because I've done my work. Right. Yeah.
I've connected into myself enough to sit with the shame and move through it to a place where I can actually sit and hold you in loving space, right? I can see you.
I can just see you as a human being and as someone, also in the broader history of our society, but just on a basic level, like being seen. Like we're talking about just literally like someone's seeing you, without it being about them. A lot of that, it seems, is reckoning with our shame. We all have shame. But the shame that prevents us from being in community, the historical shame, I think that could be like a huge amount of capacity that's unlocked within folks who are more privileged and have more power in our existing system to be great resources and position themselves in a way that helps everyone.
And it's subversive to the system for white people to self-connect, because the system by design only works if white people detach enough from their empathy to continue to reinforce the structure.
Precisely. And that's the thing is, like racism isn't like a people of color problem. It's a white people problem, right? And that's the whole thing is like, if you go to the root, it's a white body problem. So white bodies have to go to the roots of their own bodies to dismantle or uproot that shame root. And that connects to this greater like network of bodies that create these systems. But every single body that gets disconnected from that network helps generate not just like the life force and the space and the capacity to then not recreate these same relational dynamics. And actually, even like when I think about like sitting in front of the tree, just literally sitting face to face to someone versus someone like being in a sense of a hierarchy, which is like what whiteness like creates,
all the time.
Can you sit and feel when you're sitting with someone that we are relationally equals? Where in your body do you not feel that when you're relationally connecting to any other identity? And it's okay, like if it's there, but and it's not necessarily personal, and that it's not, you didn't create it from within, it's created by everyone. But it is your responsibility in community to find the roots of it if you want to create a new way.
And so for white folks watching in this time in which LA is in its 4th day, of protest and violent response from our administration, what is the ask? How should folks show up? Like that's the question, right? And I think you're like, Women's March folks to the front lines offering is really radical and beautiful. It's like, what would it look like if that were the way we felt seen and safe and protected?
And what I wonder for white people, who might be watching or wondering, where in you can you find that sense of courage? And I think to know if it feels scary, like obviously for anyone it would be scary, but it's like we find courage in presence. At least that's how I found for myself. It's when we're not present in our bodies, when we're not in our bodies, we can't be courageous, because we're in the future or we're in the past. We're somewhere where we can't find ourself.
That's so fascinating. That's true.
So if we need to be in our bodies to be courageous, and a lot of white people struggle to be in their bodies, where can you find the work that works for you? Because all of our bodies are still different, obviously. Like there's no such thing really as a white body, but it's what we've categorized this broad European group as. But what kind of practices or personal ways of moving through the world facilitate that presence so that you feel nourished in a place of you that can act with more courage.
Yeah.
And that could be very particular.
Right. And just to normalize it, the fear isn't just a white-bodied problem. Like I've been writing this last month about my own fear as an Egyptian American, Arab American person living in this country right now, and the fear of posting publicly about liberation and about Palestine in a time where I don't think our free speech exists anymore. Mm-hmm. That we're living in a really different administrative climate than we have, and I think our rights are really different than they were pre-January. Yeah. And not that, we can definitely trace back like to 9/11, all the ways in which those rights were already being stripped for Arab Americans under the Patriot Act, etc. But what's happening in my body around the fear of posting and the places in which I feel the need to self-erase, and then another part of me that's pushing against that self-erasure and finding my courage, right? And so when you say that, I'm reflecting on my own process with my fear, and that fear is such a future forward emotion. Yeah. It's not a present fear. It's a protective part of you trying to prevent some outcome in the future.
Right. And which are very legitimate fears as well. Like I think that's legitimate, right? Like the fear of being arrested if you're a mother, that is a very legitimate fear. And that's why we can't do these things alone.
100%.
If we're taking courageous action, then we need to know what network is going to catch me when I fall. Like who's going to take care of my kids if I go to jail? Right. Who's going to pay the bail? Or what's going to, all those things that are becoming very real in these days. And like just knowing where, taking practical actions to ease and know what the very practical, real, like fear is often based on very real things that will happen if you do something. Right. And that's okay too. Like I do feel fear has been demonized in a lot of spiritual or like more mental healthy worlds, but actually fear is very often a good indicator of something real that's happening. Right. And so if like I'm afraid I can't pay rent next month, if I can't pay rent next month, that's real. Yeah. If I am afraid of being arrested, that's real because I may very well be arrested. Right. And so there's no need to overcome that, but maybe make real calculations as to how we can show up or what we are willing to put on the line. Right. Yeah. And to know that you're acknowledging your fear. We're not judging our fear. Mm-hmm. We're able to sit with it and listen to what it's trying to tell us, because it's usually trying to protect us from something, some outcome, and then be discerning about that outcome, if it's a reality or not. Like, is it a likelihood? Mm-hmm. And if it is, then we can like sit and make a plan for that reality, right? Like understand our risk assessments and like what we're willing to do. And I think understanding our privilege too. Mm-hmm. So understanding my perceived fear is very different than the fear of a mother in Gaza who's like actively worried every day that her kids might die because there's no food. Mm-hmm. Like that is, my perceived fear is very different than the real fear and danger that mother is facing, right? And not that my fear calculation or my risk calculation isn't increasing because of the current administration, but it's still magnitudes and magnitudes safer. Yeah, and I guess now when we're in such a time where so many of our systems they're not the same anymore. They will never be the same after what's happened. Right. The law is not the same after what's happened. Right. What it means to be safe here is not the same. Right. And so we're living this in real time. Right. And don't know really what is safe and what's not anymore. Like you said, like free speech isn't free speech anymore. Right. Warrants are not being given for
due
arrest.
Process is not a thing.
So the law seems to be not the law. So what what do we know is safe anymore? I don't really know. And I don't think anyone can really know.
No.
And so it can be just our own individual like sense of what we're wanting to embody and be in a time of a lot of uncertainty.
Right. And then that brings me to this, you know, we're bridging between two worlds. There's like this world that's crumbling at a pretty rapid rate, I would say, in the last months. And then there's the world many of us have been dreaming and co-creating. And that world exists when we take care of each other.
Right.
Right. Like that's really, everything feels safer when you have people that are actively taking care of each other and showing up for each other in these spaces.
Yeah.
When you show up to protests in community, when you know you have safe numbers to call if you were to get arrested, when you know people have your back if something were to happen to you or your family. Right.
Yeah. Right. I'm just imagining when you're saying that, it almost feels like creating a bubble of care.
Yeah.
Where it starts, you know, caring for your body and the people that you're finding in your daily life, but expanding that bubble of care.
Yeah.
That so there is that sense of safety in an unsafe world.
Mm-hmm.
By the level, in a sense of just that care that facilitates no matter what happens.
Yeah.
Right? No matter how things go, we will be here to care for each other.
Right.
And that is part of that sense of dignity that no one can take.
Right.
You know, I've heard this said by so many people who, you know, travel to what we call like the most dark and like, you know, you say like in Palestine, it's like that's real fear.
Yeah.
There's often like when people are in those spaces of the most horrific events in humanity, that the most care is found too, right? That's what's so incredible, is that it doesn't prevent us from caring for each other, right? And I think especially when we're in a less extreme state of that, but in our own version of our own extreme political fight here, it's like what is the care that I have available to me? It doesn't have to look extraordinary to anyone else, but it can feel real and shared. Like maybe it is going through my day, making eye contact with people and really letting them know through my body language and through my words that I care.
Right.
And that can be just nourishing to yourself without it necessarily being reciprocated.
Right. Yes. And I think it's as simple as, you know, someone sharing that, you know, the other day at my kids' school, someone shared that they were moving. And just from my heart being like, if you need anything, I'm here.
Yeah.
And just saying that, they might not ever call, but for me to know that I mean that. Like, if you need something, call me. you know? Yeah. And that seems so simple. Like, what a simple offer. Do you need me to bring a meal? Like, is your mom sick and you're like out of town for the weekend? Do you want me to watch your kid?
Right.
It's just like the simplest things. Just even saying, I'm here for you as you're going through this thing and I see you.
Yeah.
That's how we deepen with each other, I think. You
know?
And even if they do nothing with that, I know that I meant that with sincerity. And that does something for me in terms of how I relate to my community, right?
Yeah, and even just finding that point of sincerity within ourselves.
Yeah.
Actually, I find that is kind of where connection comes from.
Yeah.
It's that point of sincerity, not as like a trying to be a good person, but like the true, honest sincerity that there's nothing between me and myself. Like when you're in that space of like, I really mean this.
Yeah.
There's no thing that I'm trying to get from this or any agenda that I have. It's just truly like care.
Yeah.
And like finding that place within us that then you can move from too.
Yeah.
Then like small gestures seem more significant.
Yeah.
You know, than like even bigger ones.
Right.
You could make big gestures with a huge agenda and trying to do it for yourself, really, even though it's for the community, right? We all seen that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think there's a difference between, like, when it comes from me, then I know I'm self-connecting into a place of interdependence. Like, I know I'm weaving with other people because my heart feels just unadulterated. It just feels so willing. Right.
Yeah.
And it's back to the hollowness versus the substantive feeling of joy. Like, it feels joyful to say that to someone. Because I know I mean it. If they call me, I'll actually be joyful to support, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder even just that, like, where to find that. I know it's not easy to find that in a lot of stress and but it also seems to be also under any condition available.
Right.
And that's what's strange, I think, about being a human, is that we can find this, like, if you dig into yourself, even in really dark times, there are places that are not disturbed within. We all have our own way of navigating things, but it's like there's kind of this sense that, like, no matter what's happening, there's still something kind of untouched within us as humans that could never be like desecrated, you know? And it's like that place that when you come from it, you feel like I'm being true. And I do feel like that's what it feels like when two people are in connection. It's like there's this, like, it's like an eternal spring that has no end.
It's like I see your dignity and you see my dignity, and they're touching. Like they're in connection together. Right? And how beautiful is that we get to do that together as humans, that we have capacity to do that together as humans.
And maybe even in the times when, like, I've seen this in the last few days of people who are getting arrested, that the dignity that they carry themselves with in those moments is astounding. Like, and just knowing that, like, when and if that happens to any of us, that is available in those moments too. Despite all that someone can say or treat you with, that it's possible to be in those moments and hold yourself with dignity.
Right. It's those moments where you can say, where we in our bodies can feel that whatever narrative is being imposed on us is not our narrative, and that we reject that narrative. That is not a true telling of our inner spirit.
Right.
And it's never actually been a true telling, right?
It's never been true.
And that's what's so, we're living through really hard times. But I think that's what's profound, is that all of a sudden we're these fissures are cracking in the narrative, the colonized narrative of this country and of our history. Like, that narrative can no longer be put in a box, and they're trying really hard to put our narratives back in a box, but that's just not possible. Like, too many of us are the keepers of our narratives now.
And really tapping into that power within each of us and between us that can't be contained. And that's what's so beautiful to see now, is the amount of power that people are stepping into, and knowing that, you know, the power actually lies within all the people that are showing up, not in the forces that are coming to take away something. And that's never actually been in the balance. It's never been up for debate, but we've been told it has been.
And those of us, I think we talked about the work of white-bodied folks, and I think the work of us sitting here is the work of the deep practice of grounding in our dignity and reclaiming our power together.
And I find too, even, you know, I've been inspired to want to go back to like the civil rights movement leaders, because that was what they were anchored in, was a sense of deep spiritual power and dignity in their like complete sense of humanity that's unquestionable. Like those figures who stood in places that were like literally their lives were on the line every day. It took so much internal power and communal power, but it's literally the discipline of returning to that sense of that place that no one can touch. Because when you're marching towards guns, when you're moving towards that sense of unsafety, what moves you? But that courage of finding a place that cannot be hurt. I mean, I'm sure there are probably folks that were really scared too, and just moving out of fear and doing it anyway. But what I find when I read and see like all of the ways in which the biggest movement leaders moved was that they were really though that they came from a deeper well, and that I do feel like has been a bit lost on. I've got a little friend. Hello. Has been lost a bit, in that sense of what orientation or spirit like protest is coming from.
And I think that that movement work is not divorced from spirit-based work. I think that that's really so much of what we're talking about here, is that the self-connection is actually a spirit-based connection. The connection to each other and to this tree and to this space we inhabit together is a spirit-based connection. And that being able to march toward the hardest thing with your dignity intact is a connection to your spirit and to something bigger than you in whatever way that looks to you, That's spirit work.
And as a real resource, a practical resource for practical times. When it seems like spirit or spirituality could be something that's extra. I mean, it's never been extra for people of color. Like, I mean, I feel like that, like, there's always been a need to tap into a deeper sense of strength through pain and through hardship and oppression. So it's not something that's new, but in a sense, we have gone through like generations of being divorced from spiritual institutions or community or just our bodies because of the way in which technology and the way our society and work and everything has divorced us from our bodies. So just knowing that there's nothing wrong with us if we don't feel connected to what we may call spirit or just presence or our body. I mean, I feel like just connecting to your body is connecting to spirit.
And I think it's a survival strategy. Like, so many of us had to disconnect for basic self-protection, or to exist in the system, no matter which part of the system you are on, like which... whether you're white-bodied or BIPOC folks, there's some level of disassociation that's self-protective.
Totally.
And so you're right, not judging or blaming ourselves for that separation that we might feel from ourselves. And I think watching Gaza this last year and a half, and not to whitewash the pain or the suffering that's happening, and the atrocities the magnitudes are so unfathomable, but also being witness to the resilience that happens from that, and the steadfastness of faith that I've just seen over and over. People who are deeply connected to something bigger than themselves that are making them survive the unimaginable. And I think that all of us are coming into, in our own pockets of the universe, these incredibly hard times. And so what is the well we're drawing from that is going to resource us that's bigger than just ourselves.
That requires nothing external to change.
Yeah.
That there's nothing you need to buy.
Yeah.
No membership. You don't need to go to any institution or
Right.
get permission.
Right.
But there is something that every single person has within them.
Right.
To tap into.
Right.
And yeah, that it's very culturally normal not to be connected to that. So it's a journey for each of us to find out individually and through community to share like how to come back to that. But it does seem to be, in a very practical sense, like necessary in a time with so much externally that can drain and take away, that we need something that nourishes, replenishes, and an almost a sense of a grounding, to move from, to feel, for me, like that sense of in a conditional world where it feels like care and love and protection is conditional. Can you find the place within you that it's unconditional? Where no matter what happens externally, you know you have that sense within you.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that I'm learning over many decades of time, is that the people who surround you shape that story for you and with you.
Yeah.
And we can all do our internal practice for sure about connecting into that place that is unshakable, and it'll look different for folks.
Yeah.
And the people around you can help you heal that relationship with yourself, or they can reinforce a different story.
Absolutely.
So it's really important that we think about whose energies we're around and whose energies we're taking in, whose narratives of us we're taking in.
Yeah.
Right?
Because it's all connected.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's the reason why we don't have that sense maybe is because of who we've been around.
Right.
And who we've been raised by.
Right.
And so to be able to weave, back together like a sense of connection throughout our lives, internally, externally, until there's no difference.
Right.
Until it feels like it's all that.
Right.
It's almost like mending a quilt or something.
Yes, that's how it feels. Yeah, I've been thinking about that. I want to live in congruence. Like I want to be internally and externally congruent. I want the work I do in the world to align with my deep sense of self and purpose, right? I want the way that people see me to be aligned with how I know myself to be. And I want the people around me to reflect that version of me.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So then it feels like that sincere place within you is just everything that you're seeing.
Yeah. And I want that for the people in my life. I want to be able to be an accurate mirror and reflection of their best self. Right?
Yeah.
I want to be able to hold a mirror up to all their goodness.
And all the things that we don't want to see.
Yeah.
But
all their shadow sides too. Right?
Don't need to be
right.
ashamed of, but can own.
Yeah.
I find like the more we're in touch with that like sense of goodness or presence, the more you can own too.
Right.
Because then you're not skirting away from it all. It's like, I know that no matter what, I have this sense of dignity.
Right.
So if I mess up,
and we will all the time. Every day.
We will all the time, and hopefully our communities will tell us.
Right.
Yeah, so that we actually grow together.
Right. And repair together, right? Like the repair work, I think, is so necessary and important in relationships and communities. And the way we're going to have rupture all the time. And so the way we move through repair is actually sacred work.
It's so interesting because when we're saying like this is kind of like mending a quilt, it's almost like the entire work is repair work, right? Because we're not broken, but there are parts of us that are not together, right? In community and within ourselves. So it's that it's not like repair work is something that happens after a conflict.
No.
It's like actually repair work is, it's always happening.
It's ongoing.
Because we're always trying to come into a greater sense of connection.
Right.
That we know that there's this sense that like, you know, while everything is always connected,
right,
at the same time,
right,
there's a sense of really feeling that, like you said, being congruent.
Right.
In our lives, the way we feel together, the way we live together, the way we treat each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And how we practice that, like Adrienne Marie Brown talks about fractals, right? Like how we practice that one-on-one mirrors and reflects how we can practice that systemically. So I think oftentimes we think we want to change things really big. We want to like change things at scale. But really we learn how to do that. And we do that work in one-on-one deep relationships or small community relationships. And whatever we're modeling there is what we're going to do in our systems work.
Yeah. And it's really hard just to do one-on-one for sure. It's so hard. And it's like, it's never done.
No,
but
it's
and it's not something we have to do. But it's also, it's really beautiful.
Right.
Yeah, because it does feel like, while we are always human and always have our dignity, at the same time we're always recovering or uncovering our full humanness and our full humanity.
Right.
And there's ways, we're always a mystery to ourselves and each other, so we'll never fully know every nook and cranny and shadow.
Yeah.
And so it's not something to get done. Like, it's not a linear, again, like capitalistic way of like, you have to do this work. It has to be done by this time. Time again. It's like not time bound. It's actually just the way relationship works.
Right.
Is that in relationship things come up.
Right.
That we haven't seen before.
Right.
And how do we be together through that?
Yeah, in presence.
Yeah.
Right? How are we present together in the repair, and how do we help each other grow into the people that we know we can be?
Yeah.
And that's profound work. I actually feel so moved by the relationships I've had and I think there's like a misconception that this is only in romantic relationship, because I think there's such an emphasis on nuclear family or on romantic partners being like the be all end all of where we do this deep work. And for sure, romantic partners do this work together.
Yeah.
But some of my most profound healing work is with my deep friends, like that we can be in cycles of self-reflection and mirroring and repair together, and that we can hold a mirror to each other. That is, we can reparent each other, actually. That's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and that intimacy is not reserved for just romantic partnership, but actually like part of weaving deeper sense of community is having intimacy with friends, with community members, with different people in different capacities, whatever is the thing that fits sort of the people that you're connecting with. But that sense of intimacy is not having walls between us individually. So that when we're talking about like walls and borders and all of that stuff, it's like, how are we embodying that sense of crossing boundaries and in ways that work. You know, it's not everyone that you're going to be able to have those kinds of relationships with, but the people who you can have a reciprocal growing connection with. Yeah, which is its own, you said it's like its own like lifelong work in itself. Yeah.
And I think that there's like, there's a book on. Yeah, there's something about, I think, going back to this piece about self-connection, you can't actually do the relational work if you don't have a relationship with yourself. And
vice versa.
Yeah. I think that's really hard to do that deep relational work or the systemic work if you're not having time in stillness with your own self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And whatever that looks like, oftentimes for some bodies, meditation or something that doesn't work for everybody, and something I feel is important in a time when everyone's looking to things like that. But just connecting to yourself.
Right.
So that we know we can't be in relationship without there being two beings relating.
Right.
Otherwise, if we're just mushed into the same thing, then it's not a relationship anymore. Or if we're too far apart, it's not a relationship anymore. So it's, I think it's the time maybe to ask, what does relationship really look like for each of us? Redefining what relationship means outside of these constructs that we've been talking about. And maybe we don't know what that is yet. Just like letting that be an open question.
Yeah.
Because maybe it's just emerging and it's this own exploration. Because I've been finding in my own life that just, creating new ways of connecting with people in ways that feel nourishing and don't necessarily follow the map of how I was creating community before.
Yeah, 100%. I think that there's a lot that's been handed to us that's not serving us. And I think Anna Malika Tubbs was saying at City Arts and Lecture, she was saying, this was all made up. We get to make up something different.
Yeah.
And there's something so hopeful about that, about audaciously dreaming something different together and practicing in microcosms what that looks like.
Yeah.
What does it look like to subvert the nuclear family? What does it look like to build chosen family? What does it look like to reimagine ways that we are in relationship to platonic intimacy, to romantic intimacy? What does it look like to have other people mother and parent your kids with you, right? Like there's so many different... This is a very recent foreign construct to humanity, the way we've structured ourselves. And we can look to our past, and we can also let that inform a really beautiful new way of moving through space together. And that is really hopeful.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that was a natural, great closing to like the... I love just all these open questions that we shared, and just exploring and coming into some of our own insights. But often I do feel like some of the subverting is just continuing to explore questions. And that doesn't mean just sitting always in conversation, but it's like in your life. As we live questions in our daily lives. Carrying that question with you, whatever resonates and like feels true as a question to live out. And not necessarily need an answer. Like in that same vein of not needing to be productive or to know, to have a definitive answer.
That is also a very Western concept, right? To like have to have a linear, definitive period at the end answer. It's like let's humble ourselves more.
Maybe
like, the
we
world
really don't know.
There's so much we don't know.
And if like anything, like either of us shared like doesn't work for you, whoever's listening, is like know what you know for you. But it's like to be able to enter into those questions and let them cook. And just like let them work on you. I find questions will work on me often, and I don't realize till later that I've had a question working on me. You know,
that's beautiful. I love that.
I really appreciate all your questions and the way that just left it feeling so open, but also very like we really got into specifics too. And it's really lovely to get to sit with you under this tree and to think about all the ways those questions will carry with me just from this conversation that we've had together. I think that is substance, that is like moving towards a substantive joy and being in relationship together. So I'm really thankful. Likewise. And I was gonna ask if you could share how people, they want to connect with you
of course.
from here. Yeah.
Of course. So I write at folkweaver.substack.com, and that's where I write about community and parenting and motherhood and education from a liberation-based lens. And I also do consulting work, so you can find that at attunedadvising.com.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm interested. Yeah, I wonder through some of these new like platforms.
Yeah.
That where there's new communities being formed online too.
Yeah.
There are new ways to connect in the ways that we've talked about.
Yeah.
In person is also beautiful, but when we can't,
yeah,
like there's places like Substack that
yeah.
are creating new ways to connect.
Right. It's really lovely to be able to, I've met really beautiful people through just shared writing. Like long form writing is such a powerful way to sit and think through some of these big questions that we might not have answers to. And that's been such a space for me to write myself back into existence and to find my dignity, right? Like speaking to that question of our dignity. We can write ourselves back into our dignity. We can dance ourselves back into our dignity. We can, we can talk ourselves back into our dignity with like-hearted others. And it's been cool to find other people doing that work on Substack.
Yeah, to see yourself being reflected and connecting even through each other's writing.
Yeah.
I know so many folks that may never know that like what they wrote made me feel seen or vice versa.
Right.
So there's ways in which we can do that too on that level. Yeah.
So thank you so much for the space.
Yeah.